And there you have it. Thanks for watching my Christmas cookie tutorial. For more easy cookie decorating, please subscribe to my channel.
Season to be jolly, fall. Hey, that looks awesome.
Really?
Yeah. You made those all by yourself?
Well, yeah.
Where'd you learn how to do it? You made those all by yourself?
Dad, I was watching this YouTube video.
You're so good at decorating cookies. Come on, buddy. Hey, we should go caroling.
A few years ago, my family and I were living in Pennsylvania, and one of the things that was happening around the area we were living was every year there would be a couple of farm fairs, and I grew up in East Texas, my wife did too, so we thought that we should take our children to these farm fairs so that they could see what it was like working on a farm. We didn't actually work on a farm when we were kids, we just thought they should see what it was like working on a farm. So we took Jack was probably 4 or 5 years old at the time, one year, and they had this cow that you could milk, but it wasn't a real cow, it was like a big cutout of a cow, and they had hooked up these these udders to it that you could pull, and water would come out, and the line to milk this pretend cow was long. Like every kid could get 2 minutes of milking time with this pretend cow. And so we waited in line for 45 minutes. You'd have thought it was like Rise of the Resistance at Disneyland. Okay, we waited in line for 45 minutes to milk this cow. And Jack starts milking this cow. So this picture is one I took about 5 seconds after he started. This is about 8 seconds after he started. And this is about 12 seconds after he started. So he went for a little bit, then he looked at me and he said, "Dad, I don't want to do this anymore." He says, I was like, okay, I get it. So we stopped. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but it didn't actually turn out that he enjoyed it. And for many of us, we start to feel like that about Christmas season around the middle of December. It sounded good in Thanksgiving. It even sounded kind of good at Halloween. We're looking forward to like this wonderful Christmas celebration, and we'd buy the perfect gifts, and we'd put out the perfect decorations, and we'd have wonderful family time with our family, with our extended family, with our friends, with our office coworkers, whoever it was, and it sounded amazing. But at some point, we start to realize like it's going to cost way too much money, more than I expected. We can't line up all the schedules. Everyone's kind of getting frustrated with each other that it's not working out like we'd hoped. And at some point, you can start to ask yourself the question, man, who needs this? Who needs Christmas? And so this is week 1 of a 3-week series that we wanted to jump into to answer that question, who needs Christmas? And today we're going to talk specifically about generations. We're going to look at the different generations that are prominent in the United States today and just say, what are the different value structures, the different worldviews, the different beliefs of different generations here in the United States? Why is there so much generational tension? And what does Christmas have to say to any of those generations? That's what we're going to jump into today. So we're going to start in Luke chapter 2. We're going to read a portion of the Christmas story this morning. If you've been in church a long time, this passage will be very, very familiar. If you're newer to faith or to Christianity, and a number of you are, we're excited that you're here and that you're leaning in and learning about this. You probably know the Christmas story, at least in broad swaths, broad paint strokes, but this will hone in on a particular thing that happened. Luke 2, starting with verse number 8. This is right after Jesus is born. That night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. And suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. So you have shepherds. Shepherds in the first century were looked down upon by society. They were considered, they were uneducated. They spent a lot of their time outdoor with animals, so they didn't smell awesome. They were kind of on the cusp, on the bubble, kind of seen as outside, ostracized a bit by the rest of society. If you wanted to change someone's worldview, if you wanted to shift their philosophy, if you wanted to adjust the way that they thought about themselves and about God, you wouldn't start with the lowliest of the low. You would start with someone who was, thought of as esteemed within society. But here we see that God did exactly the opposite of what you would expect. He goes and announces the birth of Jesus to shepherds, outsiders, ostracized, lowly of the low. And he sends his angel. And what's the response to these shepherds seeing this angel? Well, they were terrified. But the angel reassured them, "Don't be afraid," he said. So why the terror? Well, first of all, there's probably the just exposure to something that's very different than what you're used to. Like anytime you were exposed to like an angelic being, like that just could probably feel overwhelming. But there's also this long line of accounts of people interacting with the angelic or with the holy realm all throughout the Old Testament and some in the New as well, where there's this feeling of unholiness in the presence of holiness. It's just like, wow, this is perfection, this is holy, this is set apart, this is fully aligned with God. And I am not fully holy, and I am not fully aligned with God. And there's then this idea of lack, that there's a chasm between what I'm in the presence of and what I am. And so there's a fear that springs up from that. And so you look through the whole scriptures, what you'll find over and over and over again is that one of the first things that angelic beings almost always say is, do not be afraid. Fear not. Fear is a natural reaction to the experience that you're having right now. This feeling of grandeur that you're in the presence of, and this feeling of lack of holiness in the presence of a holy God. It's a natural reaction, but don't be afraid. Why don't be afraid? Because whatever you're afraid of, God is going to work to overcome. So don't be afraid. I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. Not I bring you good news that will bring great joy to the upper middle class. Not I bring you good news that will be great joy to people living in North America or in Asia. But I give you good news that will bring great joy to everyone. This is for you. This is for everyone. This is for you. This is for everyone. So regardless of your background, your ethnicity, what language you speak, your gender, your marital status, regardless of your wealth or not wealth, and regardless of your generation, this is for you, this is for everyone. This is for you, this is for everyone. It will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth lying in a manger. And suddenly the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heaven, praising God and saying, glory to God in highest heaven, and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased. When I was a kid, I just had this, this mental picture of what this must have looked like, with these probably very blonde hair flowing, is what I imagined. These white robes that they were wearing, flowing, probably designed by Christian Dior, and they're all just standing there, the heavenly hosts just singing, glory to God in the highest, and peace on earth to you. It was a bit of a show tune in my mind. So that's kind of that's the picture that I imagine. But I love the New Living Translation because it does something here that lots of translations miss. The Greek word there is not a heavenly host like a heavenly choir. It's a heavenly army. It's probably 1,000 plus angelic beings standing, not singing beautifully in Christian Dior, but shouting and proclaiming, glory to God in highest heaven, and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased. It is a militant, triumphant shout because the whole world has been transformed. The trajectory of the human race has been flipped upside down. Everything is different now that this has happened. And they are announcing good news. For who? For you. For everyone. For you, for everyone. This is for you. This is for everyone. Everyone will be blessed by this. And so when the angels had returned to heaven, the shepherds said to each other, well, let's go to Bethlehem. Well, let's see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about. This is for you. This is for everyone. So who needs Christmas? And what I want to postulate today is that every generation needs Christmas, whether they realize it or not. So what I want to spend the next number of minutes doing is talking about generations, what they are, specifically the ones that we have in the United States, and why there's more generational tension now than there's ever been before, and why every single one of those generations need Christmas. So a little word on generational formation. First of all, relying heavily on texts of researchers to present to you what I'm presenting to you today. I am not a sociologist, but I've read some sociologists. So a couple of books I want to recommend. One that was helpful for me toward the end of the pandemic was called Can't Even, How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation by Ann Helen Peterson. As a millennial, I'm an elder millennial. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. As a millennial, though, I found this both helpful and annoying. And then there's another book that came out a couple years ago, and this is kind of like, if you're really interested in this topic, this is like the granddaddy. Even if you don't read every word, even skimming this or reading the first part of each chapter of this is very helpful. It's called Generations by Jean Twenge, and she relied on tons and tons of data that's been collected over the last several years, over 39 million respondents in the United States to this data. Like, it's the best overview, deep dive into generational differences on the market that I'm aware of. It's fantastic research, and it's very, very helpful. So here's what you'll kind of find. How are different generations formed? okay, is kind of what's kind of my question as I approach this message. How are different generations formed? Here's what I discovered. There are different island tribes around the world that have never actually been exposed to modern technology or modern news. They continue to exist in the same exact way as they did hundreds of years ago. And so different generations within those tribes really see and do the same things that their ancestors did, right? There's not a big difference in the way that adults today do things in those tribes than the way that their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, their great-great-grandparents, their great-great-great-great-grandparents, you get it. Like, there are not a lot of differences in the way that they see the world or that they engage with the world. It's just kind of like older, younger, but very similar worldview. What we're seeing in the rest of the developed world is that the difference between generations is more divided and at a speed we have never seen in the entire history of humanity. Like, it's just way different. What is the reason for this? What's causing generational formation in the West in a way that it's not in undeveloped people groups? Well, first of all, advancing technologies. And Twinge makes the argument that this is far and away the most important piece of this, that as technology advances, generations change the way they interact with the world and the way that they conceive of themselves and of others. We'll talk way more about this as we go on. Secondly, major events that everybody's kind of privy to that happen. These impact the way that we see things. We'll look at some specifics there too. Third, these have led to increased individualism. I mean, hyper-individualism, expressive individualism that we'll talk more about. And then finally, it's led that as the younger the generation is, the slower its life trajectory. In other words, people are getting married later. They're having kids later. They're doing everything later. The life trajectory, starting a job later, the life trajectory has slowed down as to when they actually enter into adulthood. There's an extended adolescence now. That wasn't the case 50 years ago, but it is now. So we're going to talk today about 4 generations. We're going to talk about baby boomers. We're going to talk about Generation X. We're going to talk about millennials, and we're going to talk about Gen Z. There is one more generation that my kids are part of, ages 10 and less, basically, Gen Alpha. We don't have time to get to them today, and if they want to know more about themselves, they should do their own stinking research. And then the generation that's older than the boomers, right? The silent generation. And I don't have time to talk about them either, but you won't complain, you're silent. So what we're going to do is start today with boomers. And listen, baby boomers have been given a heck of a time. They were born between 1946 and 1964, a huge generation, literally in the time span that it covers, but also in just the amount of people born, right? These are the people born after World War II, and the soldiers came home, and there's this giant baby boom that happened all across the United States. So that's baby boomers. I'm a millennial. My generation has blamed every problem that my generation has had on the baby boomers for about as long as I can remember. And while most of that is accurate, no, it's not actually. It's way oversimplification. I want you to know what baby boomers lived through because the world has changed dramatically for them since 1946. So I just want to talk about some technologies then. We'll do this for each generation. Technologies. First of all, television. Was hugely formative for baby boomers. Now, television wasn't invented in the generation of baby boomers, but baby boomers are the first ones who remember having a television in the home when they were growing up as children. And I do mean a television, as in one. There would have been one television for almost every household so that they could watch one of 3 stations that they could pick from, okay? And if the president was on TV that night, your whole night was ruined, okay? There was nowhere to go to watch anything else except the president. That was the childhood for most baby boomers. Like, it was dominated by television. Television, by the way, and you'll see this with all these technologies. Television, along with the other technologies, made us increasingly individualistic. Here's what I mean by that. Before TV was as widespread as it was for the baby boomer generation, how did people spend their free time? Well, in the U.S., they largely gathered on front porches, sometimes around a radio. But because the radio wasn't a visual medium, it wasn't as captivating. So even while the radio was on, there was often conversation and discussion happening around it. In other words, before the baby boomers, people growing up spent a lot of their free times with each other or with neighbors, with other people in the town or at their church. There was a lot of socializing that happened. The introduction of the TV at childhood was the first of many other inventions that started majorly shifting away from social time and more toward personal entertainment. And so television ends up being experienced in childhood. Air conditioning was a big deal. I know that today we're super used to it, but this was an invention that totally changed things decades ago. Now, in Southern California, it does get hot here, but it's a dry heat, and I'm told that's supposed to make us okay with it. I grew up in East Texas, not a dry heat, okay? Very, very humid where I grew up, and it was just miserable in the summer. When the house won't cool down, where do you go? The front porch, or to hang out underneath the shade tree. You get out of the house, and what does that mean? You see other people. You do things with other people. Air conditioning comes along. What do? You go into the house to escape the heat, away from other people, right? So these are major differences. Birth control. Hard to overstate the amount that birth control changed a whole culture and a whole generation. You're welcome that I'm not going to go into it and spend a ton of time, but basically, when it came down to like family planning, sex could be something that you entered into without worrying about the consequences of an unwanted child. And so it became a more sexualized generation. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So then there were a number of events that baby boomers were exposed to, right? So they were, when they were children, the Cold War was an ever-looming threat. So there was always the concern that we might actually be wiped out by a nuclear weapon, that a nuclear attack would happen. Right? They didn't live through World War II, but their parents did. And here's one thing that's true. Every generation passes on its trauma to the generation after it. Right? So people had lived through World War II. They had seen as bad as it could be. They had seen what a nuclear bomb going off and devastating a couple of cities looked like. And so they pass that concern on, that fear on, and there's a real threat of it in the world at that time. So many of you who are baby boomers, you actually remember growing up having drills where you would practice what to do in your classroom if a nuclear weapon were to detonate, because everyone knows that nuclear radiation can't get underneath desks. So you get underneath the desk, and then you're safe and protected. And if you didn't know that, now you do. You're welcome. But the Cold War, so imagine, right, my kids have active shooter drills today, and that's tragic. It's tragic. It's a shame. I'm distressed that they have to have that. But I recognize that my parents had drills to protect themselves against the very real possibility of nuclear holocaust. So we've been living with some background fears for many generations at this point. So the Cold War was a big one. Many of them were drafted into Vietnam, the most polarizing war in United States history up to that point. And you had a polarization between the people who were like, no, I'm an American, I'm a patriot, whatever the leaders do, we should do that. And I'm way oversimplifying here. Versus some other people who were like, well, this doesn't seem just. This doesn't seem like we're in it for the right reasons. It seems like we're losing a lot of lives. Why are we, And so over and over again, this conversation was had. And amongst young people, it was an incredibly polarizing war. And it broke down trust within our institutions. And then you had the sexual revolution, right? Brought along by the possibility of birth control and family planning. And so people started to experiment more with sex and to see sex more as something that's pleasurable that you pursue as opposed to something that is in service to creating a family or extending a family. In addition to that, Watergate happens. And so the president of the United States is found to be guilty of something that he's not supposed to have done in order to better his chances at winning a presidential election. And so again, more and more we have a breakdown in trust. And then assassinations. If you're a baby boomer, you remember John F. Kennedy Jr. being assassinated. My father, as I was growing up, he'd tell me exactly where he was and what was happening when he discovered that JFK had been shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. Many of you remember Martin Luther King Jr. being assassinated. Many of you remember President Reagan being shot in 1981. He survived that, but you remember here we go again, was kind of the feeling, because there was just this instability brought around by these things. Now, so how did this affect boomers? And listen, as I make this list on any of these generations, right, you may be sitting there thinking like, well, I'm a boomer, or I'm a millennial, or I'm a Gen Z, and nope, it's not me, nope, don't buy it. Listen, this isn't about you. I know that that's weird, but it's about your whole generation. So just because something is not specifically true for you doesn't mean it's not generally true for your generation, okay? So mountains of data has been collected on this at this point, and you're right, it may not be true for you. You may not resonate with this, but please just know, generally speaking, your generation did. So boomers, just a few things about them then. They went from hippies to yuppies, right? Hippies were the peace, love, dope kinds of people. Okay, peace, love, dope, like that. And let's down with the man, that idea. To yuppies, which were the ones who got in the workforce and we started to make some money and we started to be able to become more individualistic and more materialistic. We went from down with the man to becoming the man in a 15-year span, okay? So it was very, very swift for boomers. And then increased materialism, right? Following World War II, many Western countries were just trying to rebuild and repair. Whereas in the United States, we've been hit at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, but the continental 48 hadn't been. And so we were able to immediately bring factories online and push out production and export. And so we had the greatest prosperity our country had ever known. Remember, the parents of the boomers, the silent generation, had lived through the Great Depression. And we went from that to the most prosperity our nation had ever known. Quite a mind shift. And so with that prosperity comes increased materialism, right? We have the money to buy stuff, and we have the capability to make stuff. And so, of course, we become increasingly materialistic. We were more prone to divorce. Right? Birth control and no-fault divorce laws meant that the divorce rate in this country started to go up. They had fewer kids than their parents. Obviously, birth control helped a lot with that, with fewer kids. They were liberal when they were younger, and they tended to be more conservative as they got older. In fact, a number of you may have had a baby boomer tell you at some point in your life that, you're progressive now or you're liberal now, but as you get older, you'll get more conservative. And they believe that because that's what happened to so many of them. But that's actually kind of unique to this generation. There is no other generation after them that to the same degree went from young liberal to older conservative. Now, there is still lots of differences in political opinion amongst every generation, but there was a major shift here that actually happened in this generation that was unique to it. So that's a little bit about the baby boomers, and now we're going to move on to Gen X, Generation X, from 1965 to 1979. What were the technologies that were formative for them? Well, I'm going to put television up here again, and it's not that right that the boomers didn't have this, but by the time that Generation X came along, households had not just one TV, but sometimes two TVs, or if you were super bougie, 3 TVs, okay? It could happen. You'd have one in the family room, you might have one in a guest room, you might have one in a kid's bedroom, and now you didn't have just a handful of channels, you had dozens of channels to choose from. Cable TV came along. You would pay money to the cable company so that you could get stations that didn't have commercials on them. And I never knew that as a kid growing up. There were always commercials on all the television, but for a while, that was the thing. Like, oh, give us money, and then you won't have to watch ads, right? Same thing Netflix said a few years ago, and then they changed it too, because that's what always happens. So technology, television becomes much more immersive. People are watching much more of it. There are more TVs and more things to choose from. And then Generation X had TV when they were kids. They had the internet when they got into high school, and they got social media by the time that they became adults with families. So over just a short amount of time, people who are in the Gen X age bracket went through all of these things. These are all brand new technologies that were very formative for their adult years. And then they had a number of events as well that formed their life, as every generation does. So first of all, the rise of divorce amongst the boomers ended up leading to more and more Gen Xers who were in single-parent homes or in mixed family homes. The Cold War ended, and so that background, constant concern of the possibility of nuclear weapon being detonated on American soil, that faded away. There was also pop culture became a really big deal amongst Generation X to a degree that it hadn't before. Generation X was the first generation that they could see Star Wars in movie theaters, and then a few years later, their birthday would roll around, and they want to do something special for their birthday. So you go down to the local video store. For those of you who don't know what that is, you can look it up on Google. They go down to the local video store, rent a VCR, and rent The Empire Strikes Back, and bring it back to their house and hook it up to the television. Dad would curse and try to get all plugged in, and then show a Star Wars film in their home to their friends. This was mind-blowing at the time. It was a really big deal. And they could do that on either VHS or Betamax. It was their choice, okay? So pop culture became increasingly something that was resonant, right? Across Generation X. That was a change. So then a few things about Gen X. First of all, they were very resilient and very independent. Lots of them grew up in single-parent homes or in mixed family homes, and they became increasingly resilient and independent. It was also the last generation that really has a great memory of their parents telling them, just go play, right? Go play with your friends, ride your bike, just be home around dark or around dinner or before 10 or before school starts in the morning. Just be home. At some point, it'll probably be fine, right? And so they did. They just went and they played and they had freedom, and no one was worried that they were going to get, murdered by an axe murderer. Like they just go and do it. Or if they were, they, more concerned about other things. So they went and they did a lot, which means that early on, they became more resilient and more independent than many of the generations that would come after them. They were also more cynical. They became adults during the birth of the 24-hour news cycle. CNN and Fox News and others started coming online. So used to Washington, D.C. scandals or news that happened across the world. Like we would hear about it, we'd read about it in the newspaper, someone might mention it at work, but this is the first generation that was in their face from the time that they were young adults, everything that was happening in the world. So they became more cynical of institutions, of politicians, of just the world in general. They also became pop culture savants, right? New magazines were coming out all the time when they were growing up about any niche interest that you can imagine. And so they became pop culture savants. They trended toward environmentalism. It's the first generation that as a generation really started to understand and comprehend that some of the ways that we were prospering as people was actually having negative environmental impacts. And what do we do about that? And so they were the first generation to really be plugged into that and to start wanting to think about things differently then because of it. Now next is the Millennials. These are my people, okay? Born 1980 to 1994. I was born in 1981, which makes me an elder millennial. So I'm the guy who's like, gather around the TikTok, children, and let me tell you a tale, right? That's me. I'm barely in, but I am in. So there's a part of me that feels a little Gen X and a part of me that feels a little bit millennial, and a number of you are tweeners like me who feel kind of caught in the middle of that. But there were a number of technologies as well. And this is from the very first time that I was a kid. When I was little, I remember the internet, starting about 5th or 6th grade. I remember reading an article about the coming internet in my 5th grade social studies class and trying to understand what it was talking about. It was difficult to comprehend at that age because there was no parallel to anything quite like it, but you could access information. It sounded like a library card catalog to me, which didn't sound that interesting. But just a few years after that, I was on America Online. They used to send us these CDs in the mail, more of them than we wanted, to try to get us to sign up for America Online. And then you remember what a pain in the butt it was to like actually log into the internet. For years we did this, right? You'd have to tell everybody stay off the phone. I need to connect to the internet. Get off the phone. Okay? And then you would finally connect and you go, boing, boing. I don't know why it sounded like a static, a donkey, and a spring all in one. And that was how we got online for years. And so I remember being like 12, 13 years old and being on AOL Instant Messenger talking to an atheist in Seattle, Washington, debating religion. It was weird, okay? Everything was anonymous, and it didn't take long to figure out that, anonymity online equals total jerk, right? Like the worst of our behaviors would come out. But from the time I was in 5th, 6th grade, 7th grade, I remember having access to the internet. That was the thing. I remember social media. Now, social media didn't come out, didn't come on full force, really, until I was probably in my early 20s. Thankfully, there was no Facebook when I was in middle school, high school, or college. I signed up for my first Facebook account probably 2 years after I got out of college. A fact I thank God for almost every day. I can't imagine being super social media-ized in middle school or high school or college. I feel like that would have ruined the experience, to be honest with you. So those of you who that's been your life and you've never known anything different, I truly feel badly for you. I wish you could know something different. Those of you who are a little bit older, my age and older, can you imagine if some of the crud you said when you were in high school was online forever? Some of you'd never leave your house. So the internet, social media started becoming a thing, and as we were entering into young adulthood, or for some of us entering into high school, and then smartphones. Hard to overstate how much smartphones changed the world. I still remember the 2008 Apple keynote address that Steve Jobs gave when he introduced the iPhone for the very first time. Now, for those of you who are younger and you've just grown up with smartphones, that's been your existence your whole life. It's just hard to explain how revolutionary this felt at the time. I remember him standing up in front of everybody with the iPhone and pulling up a photo of somebody and saying, if you want to zoom in on your photo, you just pinch to zoom. And the audience lost their mind, like, what? What is this magic? Oh, it was just crazy, right? Or he pulled up iTunes. He said, if you want to scroll through your music, right? It's got a list of all the artists on the phone. If you want to scroll through your music, you just scroll. And it scrolled through, and they gave him a standing ovation for that. That's how mind-blowing it was. Like, it scrolls. Oh, my gosh. It was amazing. iPhone released in 2008. It wasn't the first smartphone, but it was the first one to get such popular acceptance. By 2012, over half of all adults in Western countries had a smartphone. It's the fastest technological adoption in the history of humankind. And it mattered. We talked about how technology makes it increasingly individualized, right? Like the television, the death of the front porch, the lack of sitting around the radio. Well, the smartphone kind of put the nail in community for many people, to where they were in their own world on their smartphone a lot. And so millennials were the first ones, as they entered into the workforce, that it was just expected that you would always have access to your text messages and your email and your web browser and your Slack communications and anything else that we want to send you. Of course that mattered. Of course that changed the way that people thought. Now, Millennials also lived through a number of events. First of all, they grew up in the 90s, which is objectively the greatest decade to grow up in you can imagine. The 90s were an amazing decade because the Cold War had ended. We were coming out of that. We also had a time of economic prosperity and the dot-com boom that happened here in the United States. It seemed like computers, just more and more was being done with it. And all we could imagine was a better and brighter future because of these things. The internet seemed like nothing but endless possibilities. And there's no way that years from now we're going to use it to just hurt each other constantly with the things that we say in comment sections, right? We never imagined that. It just seemed like it was all amazing all the time. It was going to be fantastic. And so the 90s just had this optimism to it that other decades didn't. It's not just because I grew up then. I've talked to a lot of you about this because I was curious. And even those of you who are older than me felt like the 90s were a pretty awesome time. We balanced the budget in the United States here. Like it seemed like things were going well. And then what happens? Well, that kind of dream that life's just going to get better and better and there's nothing that's going to set us back like that. 1999, the Columbine school shooting happened. I remember it well. I was a senior in high school. We'd never seen anything like that before. And then, just a few years later, September 11th took place. And it totally changed the optimistic attitude of the country. For a few weeks, by the way, after September 11th, the country felt more united than it had in any other point in my lifetime. We had gone through national mourning together. But at some point, you move beyond the mourning, and you move to the solutions. And we couldn't agree on the solutions. And what started was a massive amount of political polarity, starting shortly after 9/11. And then politics, to me, took a turn. And it wasn't just that you could vote for this person or vote for this person. It was like, if you don't vote for this person, you're a bad person, or you're un-American, or you're not a Christian. It got to where there was a clear dividing line, and you weren't just making a choice based on your policy priorities. You were making a choice based on good and evil. And so that just continued to exacerbate, the older that I got. In 2008, we had a great recession. My wife and I, there was a housing bubble that burst. My wife and I had actually purchased a house about 6 months before the Great Recession hit because a number of baby boomers had told us that you'll never regret investing in real estate because it always just increases in value. You bunch of liars. And so we did that. And then we lost tens of thousands of dollars on our first home when we ended up having to sell and move. We had to bring money in addition to losing what we put into it, we had to bring money to the table. A number of you, I've talked to you, a number of you had that experience as well. The Great Recession was difficult. It was challenging for a lot of us. It made a lot of us feel like we were starting off life as adults far behind already. So just some things from this. So what were millennials like? Just generalizations, right? There was a feeling of entitlement. You talk to teachers who taught millennials compared to Gen Xers. There was a feeling of entitlement that they felt like Gen Xers did not have, this idea that I am special. Now, and I think that that's true. Now, whose fault is that? Well, baby boomers raised us, right? So you kept telling us we were special, and so we believed you. Then we got to college and we realized, we're not so special. But why did baby boomers do that, right? Every generation passes on its trauma to the generation after it. Have you talked to baby boomers about the way they were raised? It's not all of them. Again, these are vast generalizations. But I know talking to my parents, Emily's others' parents, many of them weren't told very often when they were young that they were loved. Many of them weren't shown a lot of physical affection. A lot of them were raised by people who had experienced terrible trauma in the war, and they were just emotionally a bit detached. So what did they do? Swung the other way. Every generation is a reaction to the generation before it. And so they raised millennials the way they wish they had been raised, telling them more, sharing more affection with them, loving them. Many of us had much better childhoods on almost any scale you would weigh it on, versus our parents or the boomer parents who raised us. And yet, of course, as you grew up, they started giving out participation trophies to us. They started to, this was the age of Barney. I love you, you love me, right? And so we're like, we're a happy family. Great. So we got to college thinking that, and our professors were quick to tell us, no, you're not special, I don't love you, and you're not part of the family. So entitlement got squeezed out of us pretty fast between that and the Great Recession. And so we were digital natives, though, right? We'd had internet, social media, smartphones, and we had all that stuff from very early on. We were the most highly educated generation up till that point. We also had delayed commitment. We were getting married later in life, having kids later in life, starting our jobs, vocations later in life. And then we were a generation that abandoned religion. It's not that we became a bunch of atheists and agnostics. It's that when we had decreasing trust in religious institutions. And so if someone said to you, what religion are you a part of? What do you identify? We would just say nothing, none, no religion, religious affiliation. And we may or may not have believed in God or believed in Jesus or this kind of thing, but we just weren't, increasingly, we're saying, I'm not going to associate with a Protestant or a Catholic church or, whatever maybe the particular religious tradition was that you grew up in. That just started to fade away. So then Gen Z, born 1995 to 2012. And on the technologies here, right, it's going to look a whole lot like the millennials, internet, social media, smartphones. But whereas the millennials kind of gradually waded into this pool, this stuff already existed by the time that Gen Z has memories. So for them, they have lived their entire life online. And they're incredibly online. So of course, that means they're also more isolated than any generation before them. They have more friends than any generation before them and less connections and actual relational equity than any generation before them. This has made a massive difference in the way that they view the world and the way that they behave and the way that they think about life. So a few historical events then that have shaped them, right? COVID-19, got to talk about this. I mean, this took a bunch of kids who were already more isolated than other generations before them and took them out of society for a year to 2 years, depending on which part of the country that they lived in. They were doing virtual classrooms. And in fact, there are less extroverts within Gen Z, as far as we can tell, and in part because they just didn't have the opportunity to grow that part of them. And so they're more likely to be more isolated, less cohesive, less together. And then I'm going to put two names up here. This is not to make a political statement. It's to show you the division that was caused and that they grew up with, right? So just two names, Donald Trump and George Floyd. One's a politician. One is someone that, was killed in Minnesota and started a whole group of race-related protests and riots all across the United States. And all this happened, over the course of COVID-19. So since about 2015, what Gen Z has experienced is the most polarized our nation has been, some would say, since the Civil War. I don't even know if that's fair. It just depends on who you read. But it's the most polarizing political climate and atmosphere. And they've had a front row seat to all of it. Because when I was in middle school and high school, I kind of knew the political opinions of my parents. They would occasionally comment. They would occasionally say things around me. But I tell you what I didn't know, the political opinions of every single adult in my life. Whereas the average 8th grader, 9th grader today can jump online, and if they go to Old Book, Facebook, whatever, if they go to Facebook, they can see all the boomers, all the Gen X's, all the millennials. They see Instagram, TikTok videos. They can see what everybody thinks about everything. Wasn't it nice when we didn't know what everybody thought about everything? You're a little too excited about that. So, I'm sorry for the pain you must have experienced. They know what everybody thinks about everything. And so in a highly polarized climate, they're inundated with negativity all the time. Because you know who seems to be happy online these days? No one. We're much more likely to post. I mean, how many of us have used Yelp to find a restaurant, really enjoyed the experience, and haven't posted a review about how great it was? But how many of us have used Yelp or Google or whatever else to find a restaurant, had a bad experience, and we're like, I'll tell them a thing or two, right? And immediately, we put it down. We're much more likely to put our negative experiences online than our positive ones. That's the way that this generation has grown up. And so just a few things to say about that. First of all, they're incredibly online. I mean, just so much of their life has been spent online, creating their own kind of digital space to be in. And even, you've seen this, I'm sure. A number of us have seen this. You go to a restaurant, look around the restaurant. If you see, frankly, you could see this amongst a number of generations, but certainly if you see a group of Gen Z there eating together, what are they doing a lot of times? Not rhetorical. Come on, so what is it? They're on their phone. They're there on their phone. They're talking to each other. Their friend is there. They're typing to each other instead of speaking out loud, right? Now, if you're older, that seems ridiculous. And if you're younger, you seem ridiculous to them, okay? Like the older people seem ridiculous to them. That's just how that goes. Why? These are just norms. They're cultural norms. They're very, very different. So it's not one's ridiculous and one's not. This is just the way that things have shifted. They're incredibly online. They're very racially conscious, right? So the good news about that is that they feel like we have not gone far enough, not just in the U.S., but worldwide, to overcome some of our natural tendencies toward racism. And the bad side of that is they're usually very slow to acknowledge any progress that has been made. And those of you who are older and remember, for instance, like maybe the civil rights movement of the 1960s, you just have more context to know that, like, yes, we haven't arrived, but we've come a long, long ways from where we once were or where we were when I was a kid. And so it's good that they keep pushing us forward, and maybe difficult that they won't notice that things are better than they once were. So delayed adulthood, right? This started with millennials for sure, but it continues to get even deeper now. Gen Z is much less likely to get their driver's license when they turn 16. to delay that. When I was 16, I was so mad because my 16th birthday fell on a Sunday. The DMV was closed on Sundays. I had to wait 16 years and a day to get my driver's license. I was furious about it. I was like, man, God has cursed me with this thing. But Gen Z, a lot of times they're waiting until they're 17, 18, 20, or more to get their driver's license. Why? When large swaths of your world is online, you don't need to go as much. And so that's being delayed. Marriage is being delayed. Vocation is being delayed. Having kids is being delayed or just not being done. They're looking to create the same physical and emotional safety in their work environments and in their school environments that they've been able to create for themselves in their digital environment since they were kids, which totally makes sense. If you're in line all the time and you're able to kind of shape your own online experience of the world, you're able to say I'm not going to expose myself to that. I'm not going to follow that person. I'm not going to look at that that website. You're kind of able to curate it however you want. And then you go to school or to college or to a workplace, and suddenly you're surrounded by a bunch of thoughts and people and philosophies that you've intentionally avoided all your life. It makes sense that you'd be able to just be like, for my own safety, I need a safe space here. I've always had a safe space. Why wouldn't I have a safe space here? So they're working through that. They're way less sexually active than the generations before them. They're both more defined by their sexual identity than any generation ever, and less sexually active than any generation ever. In fact, there's so many Gen Zs, again, generalizations, right? But many of them are so online that, Jean Twenge in her book, Generations, she talks about interviews that she's done with them. Many of them are saying they're getting their sexual gratification from pornography and through online experiences as opposed to in person. In fact, one young woman that she interviewed said that she would rather get sexually gratified like that because the alternative was to risk going out into the meat world, M-E-A-T, the meat world. Like you and I are made of bones and meat, we are the meat world. We used to just call that the world, but now it's the meat world, which sounds disgusting. But that's kind of like, there's a fear of the face-to-face interaction and of the culture that it takes to get a date or to go. It's just easier to do it all online. And so less and less people are sexually active. They're more dissatisfied and depressed than any generation in recorded history, which is a major problem. And it's a tragedy. But depression, and this is not just a COVID thing. This was on an upward trajectory several years before COVID hit. This generation is more depressed, more dissatisfied, and more anxious than any generation that we have on record before it. They're less married than millennials were at the same time in their kind of history arc here. And we believe they're going to have less kids, perhaps far less kids than any generation before them. And they're less religious. The thing that started with millennials has continued on through them. So this is, these are the generations in a nutshell, right? These are overly general. I get that. This doesn't define every single person in every generation. But there are some trends that are pretty obvious when you start looking through this. And I just want to name a few of them. First of all, material prosperity intensifies individualism. The more wealthy we get as a nation and the more technology we get access to, the more individualistic we become and the more lonely and the more depressed. So it seems like it should be good. Oh, we have more money, we have more things, we have more technology, has actually led to a deep decline in mental health and a feeling of purpose in life. Another trend, money and sex have become identity, but it didn't used to be that way, right? For a long time, you saw yourself as part of a whole. It wasn't just about you individually, it was also about you communally. And so when you went and got money, it was for you, but it was also to help your family or to help your clan or to help your town or to help your nation. But now it really is just about your own status and getting your own bag and can you make it work. Sex used to be about, intimacy with your partner or procreation to bring more children into the world. It was about you, but it was about your partner. It was about your family. It was about your tribe. It was about your clan. It was about your last name. It was about your town. It was about your nation. As we've become incredibly more individualistic, money and sex have become more of our identity than something we do as part of a larger community. And so one of the reasons we're obsessed then today with sexual identity or with money and status is because it's become how we conceive of self, whereas used to it was a part of self, now it is self. And so that's just a trend. It's a major change. There's a shift from duty to desires. In other words, used to, it's you're a part of this family, you have certain obligations. You're part of this town, this community, this country, you have certain obligations. You're part of this church, you have certain obligations. There was a duty kind of built into your communal obligations. But now that's moved from duty to desire. The only heroic story that we tell today is that you should follow your heart and do whatever you want to do. And anyone who tells you otherwise, you need to skip out on, be they your family, your nation, your church. Like, you should just do away with those people because they're prohibiting you from being all that you can be in your heart and your own desires. Every Disney movie in the last 20 years has basically been about this. Even the movie, for those of you who remember it, the movie Babe. The movie Babe was about a pig who wanted to be a sheepdog. I'll say that again. The movie Babe was about a pig who wanted to be a sheepdog. A pig is not a sheepdog. I hate to state the obvious, but that's true. How does the movie end? It ends with the pig becoming a sheepdog, okay? He rounds up all these sheep, and he shows that he can do it as the music swells, and you're singing in the theater, and you're like, you get him, babe. You are a sheepdog, babe. You are a sheepdog. And then you're sitting there thinking like, maybe I'm a sheepdog. What are the things I want to be that people are telling me I can be a sheepdog too, right? That's kind of like how the movie goes. This is, I would say, I really think it's the last heroic story that we tell in the United States is follow your own heart, do your own thing. One of my favorite animated films of all time. I watch so many cartoons now because I have children, so I watch them all, okay? And some of them I really quite enjoy, and then some of them are the Smurfs. So but a few years ago, one of my favorite animated movies came out, Moana. I love Moana. But what is the story of Moana? It's just the story of Babe, told differently, okay? She's a part of a village. They even sing a whole song like, you're a part of this village now. You know, this is who you are. Like, remember who you are. You are here to lead your people. That's what they try to get her to do. But she doesn't want to do that. That's not what is in her heart, right? But they're like, no, stay here. Remember the coconuts, like, and no one leaves. It's part of it, like you're shackled to this group of people, like the worst thing that could ever possibly happen, right? But she learns throughout the course of the movie that she's not just a part of this village, and she's not just supposed to be the next chief. She's not just those things. She is Moana. Okay, that's what she learns. And thankfully, what's best for Moana, to follow her heart, ends up being the best for her tribe as well. But it's just a coincidence that those two things happen to be the same. This is the story, the shift from duty to desire. That it's not about, I don't take anyone else into account, it's just me. And the result of it has been increasing isolation and the increasing feeling that your purpose in life is all on you to find, to discover, to figure out, to live out correctly. And if you don't do it, it's all your fault. Now, both total communal commitment and total individualistic pursuit, I'm not saying either one of these things are the right way forward. Both of them can be suffocating. That's why, as followers of Jesus, we're not communalists, we're not individualists, we're Christians who recognize that there's good and bad inherent in both of these things. So, shift from duty to desires, and finally, increased isolation, right? Like we just keep trying to do more and more on our own because technology allows us to do it. And in doing so over the years, we keep trying to find more and more purpose and more happiness, and we keep finding less and less purpose and being less and less happy. Who needs Christmas? This is for you. This is for everyone. This is for you. This is for everyone. This is for you. This is for everyone. Who needs Christmas? Every generation needs Christmas because the story that the angels proclaim to the lowly shepherds is a story that each of us desperately needs. Here's the story. You will only feel like you have worth if someone who you highly esteems you. That's not the narrative today, by the way. The narrative today is, I don't care what anybody else thinks. I love me, and that's all that matters. But let me just tell you, that's not working out well for us. Why? Because we're social creatures. We were literally designed that way. So you don't just need your own approval. You can tell yourself that, but you'll go through life lonely and miserable if you actually try to live it out. You need someone who you highly esteem to esteem you. God took on flesh and blood and came into the earth in a lowly manger, announced to a lowly group of shepherds to let the world know, not because of anything you've earned, not because of anything you've deserved, but just because of who you are, created in the image of God, his son, his daughter. He was willing to lower himself here because in his eyes you are highly esteemed. Who needs Christmas? We all need Christmas because we all need the reminder that we don't find our self-worth on social media or through our financial or sexual accomplishments. We don't find it in the approval of our parents or our friend group. like the only place you'll find lasting esteem is in the one who highly esteems you and is himself highly esteemed. Christmas is for you. Christmas is for you. Christmas is for you. Christmas is for everyone. And one of the things we have the opportunity then to do is to pass on the gift of Christmas to other generations. There's greater generational tension in our society today than perhaps there has ever been before. Baby boomers, don't give up on the millennials who blame everything on you. Show them the work that Jesus did in you, that Jesus might do that same work in them. Millennials, I know Gen Z is increasingly giving you a hard time in the TikTok comments, okay? I know. You're not the cool young kid anymore, all right? They're calling you chuggy and all kinds of other worse words, okay? You're not cool and you're trying too hard at this point. Don't give up on Gen Z. Recognize that they have gifts for this world and that many of them are suffering some degree of depression or anxiety or loneliness, and you letting them know that they matter to you may be hugely important to their development. Gen X, you're like the middle child that gets left out a lot. I know that. You've seen some things, been around a while. Keep investing. Keep pushing back, helping those who are younger and older than you. This is one of the ways that we show people the meaning of Christmas, that Christmas is for you, but we, as followers of Jesus, you count yourself amongst a follower of Jesus, like you are to help others connect with that purpose as well. Here's the thing that the shepherds learned. Jesus is good news for every generation. Father, thank you for the time together today. And Lord, thank you for Jesus and for the call in our lives that we are esteemed because you, who are highly esteemed, told us we were, showed us we were through the miracle of Christmas, through the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus. We are grateful for you. May we recognize that Christmas is for us, Christmas is for everyone, and may we live it out. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.